Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 32 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry and Technology. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Friday, July 15th, 2022, the committee is meeting to study the Rogers Communication Service outage. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House of Commons order of Thursday, June 23rd, 2022. Well, I would like to welcome our witnesses today from the CRTC, the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission. We have Ian Scott, Chairperson and Chief Executive Officer. We have Fiona Gilfillan, Executive Director of Telecommunications, and Mitchell Murray, Director of Telecommunications. We have Mr. Scott and Mr. Murray joining us today in person and Ms. Gilfillan on Zoom. Welcome to the committee. I understand Mr. Scott will be making a presentation for starters. Mr. Scott, you have the floor and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, members, for inviting us to appear before your committee. I note here on traditional unceded Algonquin territory, and I'd like to pay respect to their elders, and I'm very pleased to speak to you today about the Rogers national outage. As you mentioned, I'm joined by two of my colleagues, Ms. Gilfillan remotely, and Michelle and I here today. I would begin by saying that, as you know, the widespread outage disrupted millions of Canadians and Canadian businesses across the country. Most importantly, it prevented access to services such as 911 emergency alerting and other critical infrastructure services, and that is simply unacceptable. Canadians rely on wireless and internet services in their day-to-day lives. They depend on them to be productive at work, at school, and to remain connected to their families and, of course, to essential services. Le CRTC prend la santé,
The CRTC takes the health and well-being of the Canadian public very seriously, and one of its principal objectives is to make sure that Canadians have access at all times to a trustworthy, reliable network.
Have and continue to be a major focus of the work of the CRTC, and our focus must be on protecting networks by having contingency plans in place. It's important to note also that this outage was not a result of a cyber attack. I know you've now heard from the minister, you've heard from Rogers' CEO themselves, but it is worth repeating. As stated by Rogers, it was caused by a fault in a maintenance upgrade, and Rogers must take the necessary steps to prevent another crisis like this one from happening. As noted by Minister Champagne, Rogers communications during the outage was unacceptable. Communications with the government was poor, with other organizations, and most importantly, communications with the public and their customers. Rogers said they'll do better. The CRTC will make sure they do. So, as the regulator, what have we done so far? Our first step on July 12th was to request a detailed account from Rogers as to why and how this happened. But more importantly, what measures Rogers is putting in place to prevent such future outages. We received Rogers' response on Friday and immediately began reviewing the information to ensure completeness and adequacy. We are now in the process of determining next steps, but I will assure you that we will act quickly. We'll also continue to work with ISED, with the Canadian Security Telecommunications Advisory Committee. I'm henceforth going to say CSTAC. It's easier, in order to implement the 3 objectives already identified by Minister Champagne. And in addition, we'll be cooperating with other government organizations and the industry to identify and address any outstanding technical issues that have been identified. And this will include work done by the CRTC's Interconnection Steering Committee's Emergency Services Working Group, also known as ESWIG, as the effective delivery of 911 calls is, of course, crucial. Nous croyons à la nécessité d'être transparent.
We believe in the need to be transparent. We want Rogers to disclose all information that the Canadian public needs with respect to the outage.
Rogers. Network convergence and climate change events are increasingly putting our networks at risk. And that is why, in addition to addressing this outage, along with the initial strong actions announced by Minister Champagne, we will be taking longer-term action to ensure all telecommunications providers better protect Canadians. La résilience du réseau national.
The resiliency of the national network is one of the priorities of the CRTC. We know it's crucial to ensure the health, security, and economic integrity of the country.
To speak to you, and my colleagues and I would be pleased to try and answer your questions. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scott. For the first round of questions, we have Tracy Gray from the Conservative Party for 6 minutes. Ms. Gray, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. Do you have a role in risk assessment of those you regulate?
If you mean in terms of the networks themselves, that type of risk assessment is typically conducted by the industry department, who would audit certain of the technical practices. They have the EastWig committee where industry and ISED representatives work together to address those types of issues.
Well, I understand in the CRTC mandate, it says to ensure Canadians have access or can access emergency communication services, we make sure that Canadians can access services such as 911 and are warned through a public alerting system in the event of imminent perils. Is this correct? Is that in your mandate letter?
As a regulator, an arm's length regulator, we don't have mandate letters, but I understand the point of your question. It's part of our responsibilities, and we take them very seriously.
Right. What's on your website that it says that you have a mandate to, and then what I read. So, do you believe that you're fulfilling that mandate?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So, do you believe, as a regulator, that that you do have a role to also look at risk assessment for those that you regulate, such as the telecommunications companies, looking back at what what part of your mandate is?
I guess it comes down to what we mean when we're talking about a risk assessment. I would look at it as a regulator more from the perspective of outcomes. What I am most concerned about, and this is a perfect example, is that emergency services and alert services and connectivity is available and is provided. And if there are measures that we need to take that are part of our mandate as set out in the Telecom Act, then absolutely we should act on them.
So we do know that there have been 2 massive outages in just over a year, but with no service to 911. Also adding emergency alerts were down just in July of this year. 1 dangerous person alert by the RCMP and 3 Environment Canada tornado warnings that never worked. So you, as the regulator, and looking at what your mandate is, which I've read out, and we do know that it is part of your mandate, do you accept some responsibility for not having adequate oversight that has led to this Rogers national outage?
I'm certainly not trying to understate the significance of the CRTC's role, but perhaps it's best to take a step back. I would indicate that the 911 network was fully functional and has a 99.49 reliability rate. It is operated by 3 carriers, by Bell, by TELUS, and SaskTel. The issue here is that Rogers lost complete connectivity, and so it was unable to pass on 911 calls. I would also distinguish it from the earlier outage, which was of the radio access network. I don't want to start throwing around technical terms. It related only to the wireless segment, and the radio access network was down, which meant that 911 calls did go through. They would go to any other carrier with an active antenna in reach of the 911 call, as is designed.
Okay, thank you. So I understand the 911 action plan came out in 2014, and one of the areas was reviewing how network outages could affect services. So over the past 6 years from then to this outage, how was it that something like this was not adequately prepared for?
I might ask my colleague, Mr. Murray, to add in a second, but I guess one way of saying it is it was very difficult to prepare for something that is truly unprecedented in the sense that this impacted the core of Rogers' network, which meant, as you heard from their CEO this morning, and I think elsewhere, they were unable to connect. It is a very unusual circumstance. Rogers, as you pointed out, had an outage. Other companies have outages from time to time, and it will affect some services, and we follow up with them in each case. But this was unprecedented, and we now need to focus on how do we assure in this type of situation emergency services are connected.
Right. Well, if I may, during that same 2014 action plan, it stated that the CRTC would examine vulnerabilities in Canadian networks when reaching 911. So, with those vulnerabilities was what happened with this massive outage of Rogers. Was this type of vulnerability identified? And if so, what were plans that were put in place or recommendations that were made?
I'll ask, again, Mr. Murray to add. I didn't give him a chance a moment ago. I don't believe this type of outage, certainly has never been experienced and was anticipated. Michel, would you like to add something?
I just might speak briefly in relation to the 2014 action plan that you mentioned. I don't have all the details, but we've probably implemented the vast majority of the items that were in that action plan now. For example, when we're talking about, and Ian mentioned that in terms of 911, we actually have dedicated networks that are there for 911 across Canada. We do collect information about outages affecting the 911 network, and we have been putting, the CRTC has been issuing a number of decisions since that action plan in relation to network resiliency, reliability, and also security of the dedicated 911 networks.
Oh,
I don't want to use up your time, but I take your point, and clearly not enough, and so we need to do more work.
okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Gray. Our next round of questions, we have Mr. Dong from the Liberals for 6 minutes. Mr. Dong.
Thank you very much, Chair. I also want to thank all the witnesses for coming to the committee today. My first question comes from a constituent of mine. Following the incident, many Canadians are thinking about switching their private providers, if previously was Rogers, or at least diversify their providers. In my writing, a constituent called, and she tried to switch from Rogers to a smaller provider, but she was told by the provider that her building was not serviceable. I therefore called the provider, and I was told it's not due to technical reasons. So I suspect, although they didn't confirm, it has something to do with agreement they enter into with Rogers or contract that they signed with one of the large three. So are you aware of this situation across the country that's happening? Apparently, this is a phenomenon right now that condos and apartments, high-rises, they are only to purchase, or their tenants only to purchase service from Rogers or Bell.
I'm just trying to figure out how to phrase my response. So this goes to the set of rules we have around access to multi-unit dwellings. So obviously, I don't know the specifics in this case. Most buildings, certainly historically, new ones may be a little different, had both cable and telephone company connectivity inside the buildings. New buildings may choose only one initially. The Commission's regulatory framework allows for any ISP, Internet Service Provider, or local competitor to have access to a building. And if they can't get that access, then they would come to us with a complaint. And we get those complaints not only from small players, but also the large ones where Rogers might want to get access to a building that Bell is in. Well, the tenants can only access whoever is in the building.
Right.
Unless the only other way would be if there was a resale arrangement and a company was leasing, access.
So it sounds to me that with the current rules that many consumers, especially in those living the high rises, does not have a choice. They can only go with one of the big two. And it sounds to me that's the situation. But I'm going to move on to my next question. On July 12th, you instructed Rogers to provide details of the cause to the most recent outage. And on Friday, the 22nd, you received a response. Have you had a chance to review the response? You have it right with you? There you go. My version is redacted.
I did. I haven't finished my homework. We received them, obviously, towards the end of the business day on Friday. Staff began examining the responses immediately, have worked over the weekend. I personally reviewed them, but certainly some aspects of this are well beyond
So
mine.
what are the next steps to the investigation?
The next steps are clearly with respect to these responses. We need to finish our examination of the responses and make a determination as to whether these are complete answers. My initial impression is Rogers is being fully cooperative and transparent. They appear to be fulsome responses, but I'll let my expert staff finish their analysis and indicate whether, if anything, is missing. Then we will work with Eastwick to determine, to help with the minister's already established objectives in any way we can as we decide what are the next steps.
Okay. So there was one particular information I was looking for, and I don't think it was asked, is there any way Rogers can quantify the economic loss directly due to the outage? I'm not talking about some indirect, people, whether or not they lost their means to do complete transactions, whatnot. I'm just talking about direct economic losses, and I'm talking about small businesses, not-for-profits, not be able to raise funds on a Friday. We know a lot of Muslim organizations on Fridays. That's their day to receive donations. So, would you be able to include that question in your next steps of investigation and see if we can quantify the economic loss due to the outage?
We certainly do not have that information. I don't know if Rogers could possibly make such an estimate. I don't know if you put that question to them this morning. I think it would be very difficult to quantify. There's so many unknowns. I did hear Mr. Staffieri say that they are in discussion both with residential and business customers to understand better the economic impact on them. But I have no further information at this point.
As a member of the committee, can I have your commitment to ask that question to Rogers?
We can ask them, yes.
Okay. Do I have more time, Chair? You have about 30 seconds. Okay. I appreciate the difference between the 2021 outage and the outage we just experienced last Friday. Was there any instructions or changes promised by Rogers back in 2021? Because, again, they said, we'll do things to make sure this doesn't happen again. So
I am aware that they informed us and took steps. Following the outage so that particular type of outage could not happen.
And
would not happen. I should say can't happen. That never is the case.
And were you satisfied with the steps they took? And since 2021, those outage hasn't happened.
Well, these are always, with hindsight, I would now say, no. Maybe they should have been focusing on the core. Yes, we were. They addressed the issue. They identified the cause. They introduced measures that would lessen the probability of that ever happening again. In that sense, yes. But one can never anticipate whether or not outages, can happen given different circumstances.
satisfy the
I'm saying that in hindsight, it turns out that that is a much smaller problem than one we experienced on July 8th. When a
And,
core network went down. Yeah.
thank you,
Sorry,
Mr.
Mr.
Don,
Chair.
your time is up. And next we have Monsieur Lemire from the Bloc Québécois for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm very happy to see you in the chair. Mr. Scott, thank you for appearing. It was reported in some media, according to experts, that the outage showed that we need more competition, better regulation by the government. Do you agree with these assertions? These are two different subjects. It's certain that we want more competition for wireless businesses, and for those who provide broadband services. But it's not obvious that that would make a difference. Michel, do you have anything to add? In the minister's words, you said there was they wanted a more reliable network, more affordable, and I think that, in my opinion, for that you need competition. Nevertheless, the CRTC, and you said you've asked for detailed information explaining the network outage. Will you make this information from Rogers public? It's possible, but some information is confidential. But as I said in my introductory remarks, whatever we publish will be available to the public. Now, what are the measures that you can adopt to make sure that these events don't happen again? Well, we have various tools at our disposal. We can ask Rogers questions. If they don't answer, I forgot the word in French, but we can always look at administrative monetary penalties. That's a possibility. But we probably won't need this kind of thing. Now, when there's something of this magnitude that happens, do you have the power to inspect Rogers facilities and ask them about what would happen if there is a failover plan? Do you look at just how robust our telecommunication system is? Michel, would you answer, please? Well, I'm not an expert about these issues, but in the Telecommunications Act, there is the power to inspect. Could it be used in this sort of case? I couldn't say, but it's possible. There are all kinds of possibilities. As was mentioned, we just got a response. We just started looking at it. So independently of what we see or what we read, there will be discussions about what the next stages will be. Well, about the outage in 2021, was there anything there that might have helped us avoid what happened in July? Were there any measures that could have been inspired by 2021 that would have helped us in July? Well, about the 2021 outage, it was a different kind of event. The circumstances were different. customers, for the most part, were still able to make 911 calls. So it was very different. We did ask questions. We asked Rogers questions. In our letter of July 16th, we wanted to know what the differences were between the two outages and how we could continue to improve things in order to avoid this happening again. Well, among the solutions that have been proposed, there was the fact that Rogers would be able to count on other providers as a backup to ensure the continuity of a service. Now, there might be a lack of investment in certain sectors. This might mean we start, leveling towards the bottom in order to save the situation. Well, these are things we have to look at. But the situation we had to deal with on July 8th is the one where we would say any solution that would help us avoid this kind of a situation would be a good one. We have to look at the pros and the cons and how to decrease the inconvenience for Canadians. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lemire.
We have Brian Massey for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to Mr. Scott, thank you for both the witnesses being here today. Will you open up an inquiry under Section 48 of the Telecommunications Act to look at making sure that there's a guarantee of basic service levels, compensation, resiliency, and redundancy, especially in the emergency response aspect? But will you do that?
Thank you, Mr. Massey. We will be looking at a number of possibilities. I can't say what they will be yet. As I said, the first step is to examine and satisfy ourselves about the completeness of the responses, to work through ESWIG, and then the Commission will make a determination as to the next steps.
So here's a current scorecard, and this is what I think I find frustrating from myself with regards to what's taking place here, is that you have a failure by Rogers in the system, affecting not only just the economy, but also critically 911. That falls under responsibility of the minister and also to our regulatory bodies, because whatever anybody wants to say about it, we allowed a provider to actually provide service that wasn't complete and wasn't willing to invest in it because it wasn't technology as a problem. So now what's going to happen is the minister's been meeting privately with the CEOs of an industry that's notorious for fighting amongst themselves and also of unused unscrupulous practices to consumers, as a competition bureau has shown. And now we have a regulator, being the CRTC, and no disrespect, Mr. Scott, you're a former TELUS executive, and we're not going to see all the documents. You've just admitted that already, that you're going to be redactions on those things. How is the public to have any confidence whatsoever in this process? And if it's not the minister's responsibility for this, then is it the CRTC, or do you not have the proper legislation? This shouldn't have happened. It's as simple as that. Whose fault is it at the end of the day? And how can the public's confidence be restored when we have all this insider stuff basically being set up for the solutions? There won't even be a public inquiry about it.
There was a lot of elements to that question. I will say this. Number one, you asked whose fault is it? The answer is Rogers. You asked me.
Well, no, they operate under legislation.
They do,
yeah,
but they operate the network, and they are responsible, and they are and have taken responsibility for the outage. Our responsibility will be to investigate thoroughly. We do so in a public manner through public proceedings. The only information which will be kept confidential is that which is either harmful for competitive reasons or harmful because it could provide a toolkit for those who would exploit weaknesses in the networks.
So what penalty will Rogers have for this from you?
We have not even barely begun our examination. I can't reach a conclusion before we have evidence.
So then what could be the results then? Is it going to be financial? Will it be any criminal? Will it be the consequences for people that couldn't get through 911 or have other problems that we don't even maybe know right now? But who's going to be subscribing those penalties? People want to know.
Well, first of all, whether or not penalties are required is a matter still to be determined. We have a number of tools at our disposal, the most obvious of which is administrative monetary penalties, but they are used to encourage compliance. They are not meant or designed to be punitive, which is made clear in the legislation. And obviously, we do not have jurisdiction over criminal matters.
Exactly. And so here we are again with basically what we have is the minister making up stuff in terms of what they can do at the time, doesn't even get a phone call about the situation. We have yourself didn't get a phone call about the situation. And we have a situation where our legislation doesn't even provide for any type of real culpability at the end of the day anyways. So you have a power that you could exercise now instead of fooling around with this, and we can get some information which you may or may not provide to the public, because you already said that some of it might be redacted. So you're going to decide what those are. How does the public even know that? And what's the oversight, I guess, for yourself at the end of the day? Just Parliament?
I think that's a very significant oversight, but yes, we are accountable to Parliament. I would take issue with your characterization of the public will not know. Not only are the claims of confidentiality subject to applications by the public, but they are a matter of public record. So the information which it can be sought, and Rogers will have to persuade the Commission of the need to keep it confidential. The commitment I did make was that all the information Canadians need to understand how this happened and what is being done to lessen the possibility of any such thing happening in the future will be communicated in a fulsome way to Canadians.
And how are you going to be available, or what is, I guess, the powers that you have for these personal conversations that Rogers and others will have with the minister and all those meetings, and then other subsequent meetings that might take place, and who can be in as a carrier provided this and who's not? Who's going to decide even who's even going to be in as the carriers for these things? And how are you going to get access to those meetings? Do you have access to all those meetings between the minister and the different organizations?
My understanding is that the matters that the minister has raised are being assigned to ESWIG. And ESWIG is a committee made up of ISED representatives as well as industry technical representatives. And I have been assured that we will be invited to participate at the
And will
ESWIG.
all that be public?
Is all of the matters at ESWIG public? No, because it relates to technical issues that, if were completely public, would create a toolkit for those who have nefarious intentions. There is certain information that needs to be protected, Mr. Mess.
Okay. Well,
Yeah, but just not the public.
No, the public includes those who would exploit that information.
Okay, we are out of time, Mr. Massey. Moving on now to the second round, we have Monsieur Deltel from the Conservatives for 5 minutes. Monsieur Deltel, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and very pleased to see you there. Messieurs Scott et Murray, soyez les bienvenus à votre chambre.
Welcome to the House of Commons. We're here to put questions, and you're there to answer. Can you please remind us of what you at the CRTC did following the events of April 19th, 2021? Can you tell me what you and the CRTC did following the events of April 19, 2021 in the south of Ontario, the outage there? Well, I don't have access to all the details of what happened. But as we said a few moments ago, the situation was different in April 2021 insofar as the cellular network wasn't working, but all other services were working. People could call 911. When there is a truly significant outage, then we communicate with the service provider and we make sure we try to understand what's happening when they hope to reestablish services and the impact on emergency services, including 911 and alerts. There are Canadians who get in touch with us because they want to know what's going on. So we want all the information we need so we can answer and respond to these people. I think you saw that in 2021, Anthony Lacavera had alerted the public about what happened in 2021, and he said that we have to make sure that these various networks can communicate with one another. Now, what I'd like to know, we're talking, what happened, what happened 3 weeks ago, and what happened 15 months ago are different things. But for hundreds of thousands of people who were impacted twice, both times it was Rogers. If you say, well, the first time wasn't really that serious, I don't think they'd find that very funny. There were groups that did warn. I don't think that you and the CRTC must have known that. So after what happened in 2021, what did you do to make sure that there could be something done so that if there was an outage, the other providers could have helped? What did you and the CRTC do following the event of 2021?
Distinction here. Outages happen, and I don't like saying it's not just Rogers. At the moment, it's very much Rogers, and there are two in relatively recent times. You are quite correct, and but they're so different in nature. It's hard to say why weren't the right measures put in place. Measures were put in place. What this outage has taught us is that we need more measures. We need greater network reliability. We need greater measures, prescribed measures, for the industry to cooperate in emergency situations. So this is unprecedented, but it has now happened, and there needs to be further steps taken. And we will take steps, and the minister has announced he has taken certain steps.
Mais comme je vous l'ai dit, je sais que ça fait 4 fois que vous parlez du ministre.
Well, the minister talked about getting people together. Did this happen following April 19th, 2021? I have another subject I want to address. In the CRTC, are there regulations that could be changed that would have prevented what happened 3 weeks ago? I don't think so. Nothing obvious. It's not, there's no legislative provision that is adequate to address this kind of situation. Well, you know that we are lawmakers, so I put the question to Rogers and to the minister, and I'm putting it to you. Talking about legislation and regulations, those who have a license from the CRTC have to offer appropriate service. Now, I know that you're not a tribunal and you don't administer penalties. I think my colleague in the NDP went quite far in his recommendations, but his concerns are totally legitimate. You have to recognize that what happened is terrible, and it will take hundreds of thousands of dollars that were at stake. There were people who were deprived of service for far too long a period of time. I got an email this morning saying that someone didn't have access to service for 6 days. What is Rogers going to do? What is the CRTC going to do to punish Rogers?
Je vais répondre en anglais si je peux.
Excuse me, I'll answer in English.
Simply too early to indicate what will be a commission decision. We are a tribunal. We are quasi-judicial. We make our decisions based on facts and a record, not public statements or promises. We will get a record, and then we will take the next steps. And as I said to Mr. Messe, and our proceedings are public. So to say how will we punish Rogers, that's not the issue today. Today is understanding what happened and what measures need to be put in place, and then other matters will be addressed as we go along. But I don't speak for the commission. Commission makes decisions based on a record, and 9 members make those decisions on the advice of expert staff.
And
C'est pas possible de dire aujourd'hui, ça
It's not possible for me to say this is what we're going to do. Thank you, Mr. Deltel.
on my list, we had Mr. Fillmore from the Liberals. I understand he had some technical difficulties which have now been resolved. We can go with Mr. Fillmore, or we can go with Mr. Erskine Smith. I see a thumbs up from Mr. Fillmore, so that's what we'll do. Mr. Fillmore, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. And can you hear me okay? Okay, wonderful. Here we are. Thank you to the witnesses. I want to come to the point about when CRTC heard about the outage. So can you tell us when it was that you were made aware of the issue?
Our technical staff was aware in the morning. Obviously, from about 9 o'clock on, our client services received some complaints. There were news items and so on. Rogers' technical staff reached our telecommunications staff in the mid-morning. I don't have the precise time with me, but I would say, something around 10:30, which is actually consistent with what Mr. Staffieri, I heard say earlier about that was about when they got their internal communications sorted out. I then heard from a senior official personally a couple of hours later, and Mr. Staffieri contacted me later in the day.
Thanks for that. We want to get on the record the sequence. We have the record of on the record the sequence of communications now from Rogers, but interesting to hear it from CRTC as well. Now, once you did hear directly from Rogers, what did that trigger within CRTC? What started happening that day in your office?
Well, many things. Fundamentally, we were attempting to find out, to discuss with Rogers, and we're in contact with them throughout the day to understand what was the nature of the outage and when it would be restored. Those were the fundamental issues, to which, in fairness, they couldn't answer. And they didn't because they couldn't at that point. My personal message to the senior officials was 911 had to be restored as a first priority, and I wanted to make that clear to Rogers. And I guess somewhat, and well, it's not an editorial comment, a statement from me that their communication with their customers and the public was inadequate, to say the least. And they had to communicate better with the public and with government.
Okay, thank you. Now, we've heard from Rogers some of the potential technical solutions that they will, that they've been asked to figure out because the minister asked them to, that involve, bouncing 911 calls to another carrier, presumably the same with a point of sale transaction. So those are some technical sort of software and hardware solutions. But from the CRTC's perspective, what is within the CRTC's domain to what can you do to ensure that this doesn't happen again?
The words that scare me are, doesn't happen again. As I said, this is unprecedented in terms of the nature of the outage. The fact that they lost connectivity completely. And that could occur whether because of a cyber attack or extreme weather circumstances. These challenges are increasing. So our focus as a regulator will be on contingency planning, on ensuring that the robustness is there. This happened. Now we need to take into account what happens when a network goes down completely and there is no connectivity. So 911 is one of the obviously most important elements to us, but generally we need to make sure that the carriers work together to ensure that Canadians have available communications to them.
Thank you. And I wonder if you or your colleague would be able to offer an opinion or an insight as to whether the regulations that you're currently empowered with are sufficient. Are there others that you wish you would have had in your toolkit that Saturday, or that perhaps that your investigation is starting to lead you toward thinking about adding to your toolkit? So I guess the question is the regulation as it stands today sufficient, and are there things that you foresee that would be beneficial to add?
I'd like to be omnipotent, but we're not. It's a bit like the question we were asked. I can't think in these, with respect to network outages, there isn't, I don't have a provision that said, oh, if we had the power to do X or Y, we would have been able to prevent this. There are areas where I would like to see legislative reform. Access to support structures. I mean, these are complicated issues, but there are a number of areas, and the Commission has commented publicly where we would like to see certain problems solved. But specifically with respect to the outage and network reliability, I think this is a situation that can be addressed by the industry. It's in their collective interest to do so, and it's in our interest and that of ISED to make sure they do so.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, how are we on time?
You're 30 seconds over already.
Oh, thank you for your indulgence, and I thank the witness. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And next we have Monsieur Lemire for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. We've heard that according to experts, the outage showed that telecoms should be considered public utilities rather than being run by private companies. What do you think of this? Do you think that this might lead us to rethink how telecommunications are managed and run? Well, the issue, if I've understood your question, doesn't have to do about whether it's a private or public business. What we're looking at really is a technical challenge.
That's not the challenge. The challenge is to anticipate these kinds of technical challenges and have a degree of cooperation. J'espère que ça répond à votre question.
Parfait, merci.
I hope that answers your question. Good, thank you. Were you able? Have you looked at C26? I'd like to know what you think of it. Do you have the same? Are you as sure as the minister to think that this will add resiliency to the network? And how do you think it might be improved? Well, that's a question for the minister. It's really not within my jurisdiction. It's up to legislators to decide on legislation. But it is important to note that security is a very important part, is a very important thing. I think it's extremely important. Can you tell us what do you think of the compensation Rogers is going to offer its customers? Do you think it's sufficient given what these customers have experienced? No, I'm not going to comment.
Alors, c'est pas approprié de.
It wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment. Thank you.
Next, we have Mr. Massey from the NDP for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Scott, you just said that you think the industry can fix this and it's in their best interest. So how do we get here in the first place?
If you mean how did this outage happen? I mean, I
yeah,
think
because if you're saying they can fix this, and so they obviously didn't plan properly or didn't work together, and you're identifying that they can do that, and then it's in their best interest. So that doesn't sound like very much oversight.
Well, no, what I said is we, and I assume, although I cannot speak for ISED, I did hear what the minister had to say, but both the department and the CRTC will insist and will require the industry to make the necessary arrangements. My comment about the industry is they do have an incentive to work together to address this kind of outage, because it could happen to anyone.
Yeah, and so we've set up a system then that failed itself. And this is what we have to do as a committee, is to figure out our legislative role with, basically how we've set up a system that's heavily regulated, has very little competition, and on top of that, as an essential service for Canadians, including 911. And we've set up a system right now, and I want to make sure I get this correct, where we are going to rely on the industry to fix that problem.
Sure, for our part, that there are measures put in place to address this kind of situation.
And if this fails, what should be the difference in terms of your recommendation right now at the moment if we go through this again and it's not successful, similar to what Rogers had another problem? Do you have any recommendations about how we should change any of the responsibility and culpability of this? Because right now, it's basically Rogers can say that it's their fault, but at the end of the day, we provide them access and rights to do business with public interest right now. So what should change in the future for that front if we find ourselves here again today, if they can find the solution you think they can?
Is on having the commission deal with the industry to put in place the necessary measures. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't predict the future, and I won't predict failure. I hope to ensure the opposite, that the necessary measures are put in to make sure that the networks are more robust. I would also just add, you've said a couple of times now the 911 network failed. It did not. The 911 network always worked. Rogers lost complete connectivity. So
okay, that's a technical argument here. If you're calling 911,
I'm not arguing,
at the end of the day, if you're calling 911, your phone, it doesn't get through. People just don't care about their phone didn't get through. That's what it is at the end of the day.
I agree.
You can say that it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, the call didn't get to where it needed to go for an emergency call. That's all that people matter and care about right now.
I agree, sir, very much. My point simply was you just characterized it as the 911 network failing, which was not the case.
Well, you can argue on a technical spot, but the bottom line is that people just really care about their call getting through and consistency there.
You are right.
And that's the...
And thank you so much that we are out of time. And next we have Monsieur Genereux for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses. Mr. Scott, they say never two without three. Let's hope this doesn't hold for Rogers, that there will be a third time. It caused a great many problems. But this outage, as you said yourself, happened at different levels. The two instances, there were different circumstances, but I think in both cases there were technical issues. But in your toolkit at the CRTC, what do you have to minimize the number of outages and hopefully prevent them entirely? Do you need more tools, or are there things you need, additional tools in order to help you in your work? Thank you for the question. Michelle, will you answer, please? Well, these are the things we're going to be looking at in the coming weeks and months. As my colleague said, there's a committee who will be looking at this. We'll be discussing this with ISED. We'll be working at CSTAC.
These questions on va faire partie de ces discussions-là. On a également le...
We'll be part of those discussions. There's also the Working Group on Emergency Services, which will provide advice to us. We'll be working with that working group as well to see what might be done. Thank you, Mr. Murray. Mr. Scott, you said earlier that you were going to see to it that communications from Rogers in this case, that telecommunications would be improved. And second, the outages aren't don't only have to do with Rogers, they happen with other companies. What are you going to do to avoid this in the future? This isn't the first time it's happened at Rogers. It happened 15 months ago. Were there penalties at that time about the event in April, and if so, what were they? That's a very important question.
Commission will do. The issue of their Rogers communications will be something the Commission will be looking at. So I can't tell you what the resolution will be. As I said earlier, it is always a question of us making a collective decision. But clearly there was inadequate communications, and we need to establish, I would say, a protocol, not just for Rogers, for all the industry, because Rogers is not the only company that has outages. They just had the biggest one, but they are not the only company that has outages. So consumer communication with Canadians needs to be better, and it needs to be, I think, prescribed. But that's something we will look at in the coming weeks.
Est-ce que il y a 15 mois, Rogers avait reçu?
Well, 15 months ago, you said you were a quasi-tribunal. Was Rogers, did it have to, was it penalized for the incident 15 months ago? No, there were no penalties imposed. And why? Well, I'll answer in English.
AMPs are not meant to be punitive.
So?
But it is an important difference. It is meant to make companies, encourage companies to comply. So Rogers and others have had outages.
But how do you do that?
We investigate, and then they introduce measures. If they introduce measures to correct the problem.
If you cannot give a fine, Mr. Scott, if you cannot give a fine because someone had a outage and you don't give them a fine because it's more to encourage people to change their matter, the way they're doing things. How are you going to impose a fair, well, I mean, a price or whatever, des amendes, je me souviens plus le nom en anglais, mais
fines.
How are you going to do that?
It's not that we don't do it. We do it on the Castle side. We have done it recently on the telecommunications side, penalized a major telecommunications company for frustrating a competitor from offering service.
Okay,
so we do it. My point was simply, if Rogers does something, it has a practice, and we tell them we want them to change and correct it, and they change it, then they don't require punishment. What you're saying is they do in this case. Maybe they do. I don't know. We haven't made that determination.
Okay, that's fine.
And Monsieur Généreux, that is time. That is time.
Je m'excuse, mais ma réponse est trop longue.
I'm sorry, my answer was too long.
Generous.
Sorry. We do have a tight schedule, so I finally we will go to Mr. Erskine Smith for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate you being here, Mr. Scott, and I have to say at the outset, I also appreciate the questions you put to Rogers because it was their answers that I fully understood what had taken place. You and I have exchanged in the past around my frustrations I probably have expressed to you around price in this sector, and I always took the answer back to concerns that I've expressed to be, well, we don't have an affordable network, but we have a resilient network. And the outage that we've seen with Rogers puts some lie to the fact that we have this resilient network. What do you say now when we don't have an affordable network? Resiliency has also been put at risk given the concentration we've seen in over 12 million customers Rogers has. Does it not make you reflect? I'm certainly reflecting, but does it not make you reflect on the heavily concentrated oligopoly and the need to address that core challenge?
The short response to your question is, do we need to do more and better? The answer is yes. Network reliability generally has been good. This is an example of showing not good enough, and it was a catastrophic failure. So steps have to be taken, no question about it. Are wireless rates too high? You and I have had this discussion, and yes, they are. And they are going down, and they need to continue to go down. And we have a regulatory framework in place to assist in that, and it will continue. I will take issue with the.
Can you pause there just for a second? Because I was looking at the analysis of rates, and Saskatchewan kept jumping out at me. And I got a question the other day on the radio: should we nationalize networks? And I have to say I balked at the question, and I wasn't as familiar with SaskTel as I should have been. But Saskatchewan has much lower rates than certainly level 1 and level 2 in wireless than in other parts of the country. I think that's a consequence of a Crown-controlled operation out there?
I don't have those numbers with me. I don't think, I can tell you that Saskatchewan does not have the lowest wireless rates in Canada. Quebec, on average, had the lowest wireless rates in Canada, and that can largely be attributed to the effectiveness of a regional competitor in the form of Videotron. And that competition has driven down rates in Quebec more than anywhere else in the country, and the Commission's framework is designed to encourage that and other forms of competition so that that will be the case everywhere.
And you mentioned it's in Rogers' interest to address this, and I would say it's now in their interest to address this because it's a PR nightmare for them. Mm-hmm. But if they'd had an incentive to address this, they would have, because the answers they were prescribing at our committee, separating wireline and wireless, partitioning, these don't seem overly complicated to a layperson like me, and it costs them $250 million. We'll say 10 CEOs worth of fixing this problem. They make over $1.5 billion in net income every year. If it was in their interest, if there was adequate competition, if there was so easy for a customer like me to go somewhere else, then wouldn't they have maybe put more into a resilient network?
I don't know the answer to that. Obviously, it's kind of a hypothetical. I would say this, though, that the measure that, as I understand what Mr. Staffieri was referring to, is to separate the networks out at the core, because in this instance what happened is when the core failed, everything failed. And
yeah, so they basically DOS themselves.
So what they're saying is, well, at a minimum, and I'll give you an example, several times the outage in 21 has been raised. That was on the wireless network. And the reason that they still offered the other services is because it was only the wireless radio access network that was unavailable for a period of time. What Rogers is now saying is it would be good practice to split the core. I don't know of another situation where the core failed in its entirety anywhere.
I don't want to presuppose the outcome, and you said you're still doing your investigation, but assuming you find negligence here, your tool is an administrative monetary penalty.
The issue of a financial penalty was that question, and there we have AMPS available to us. There are many other tools. We can make various orders and require them to do a number of things. It depends what is the harm you're trying to cure.
And my last question, because I'm running out of time, is the FCC in June and then in July, they've tabled a report around wireless resiliency and new rules and updating their rules. Were you in active conversations with the FCC? Have you been in active conversations with FCC to take a similar approach from the CRTC's perspective?
Our staff regularly engages. I met with the current chairperson of the FCC about 6 weeks ago, and we discussed a range of things, including protecting networks both from cyber attacks and overall resiliency. She did inform me of some of the measures the FCC was contemplating, and our technical staff and that of the FCC do have regular dialogue.
I look forward to the CRTC report on wireless resiliency. Thanks very much, Mr. Scott.
And thank you, Mr.
Apologize. Mind my procedural manners today. I have not been directing my responses through you. For that, I do apologize.
Oh, that is certainly all right. And thank you to the representatives from the CRTC for joining us today. And now the meeting will suspend while we bring in the new group of witnesses.
Thank you for hearing us.
And welcome back, everyone. We are now joined by a new group of witnesses appearing as individuals. We have Michael Geist, Canada Research Chair and Internet and E-commerce Law, Faculty of Law, University of Ottawa. We have Ben Klass, PhD candidate, Carleton University, Senior Research Associate, Canadian Media Concentration Research Project, and Dwayne Winzik, Professor, Carleton University, Director, Global Media and Internet Concentration Project. Those three are appearing as individuals online. And joining us in person from the Public Interest Advocacy Center, we have John Lawford, Executive Director and General Counsel. First, we have Michael Geist joining us for 5 minutes. Mr. Geist, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair. Good afternoon. My name is Michael Geist. I'm a law professor at the University of Ottawa, where I hold the Canada Research Chair in Internet and E-commerce Law, and I'm a member of the Center for Law, Technology, and Society. I appear in a personal capacity representing only my own views. I have to begin by noting how discouraged I've been by what I've heard for the past 3 hours of hearings. We need more than tough talk and references to ministerial demands to CEOs. It's about far more than who called who or solely about the failure of one company. I think we have to recognize that private phone calls or beers amongst the companies, legislators, or regulators isn't the answer. And it can't be about saying I'm sorry, but then evading questions on key issues such as essential services, as if it's hard to acknowledge directly that 911 calls should be an essential service. Or about a regulator who blithely dismisses the role that competition played in this event or that new regulations could play. Today's inescapable takeaway is that much more needs to be done, and it needs to come through a legislative framing. To that end, I'd like to highlight the following 7 measures. First, the investigation should extend beyond the CRTC's initial round of questions in today's hearing. Organizations such as Interac, governments, and healthcare providers need to explain how they found themselves without redundancy plans and an appropriate backup system to address wide-scale network outages. Assuming some of these questions are outside of the CRTC's remit, or it's unwilling to extend what is itself an uncertain process further, it falls to this committee to expand the study and ask those questions in a public forum. Second, there must be greater transparency with respect to the outages. Rogers can't claim to support transparency and simultaneously request wide-scale redactions in its submissions to the CRTC. The Commission should reject the request for redactions where it's in the public interest, which seems to apply here given that public safety is involved. Further, there is a need for a consistently transparent approach to network outages and extended downtime. These should be filed with the regulator on a regular basis and disclosed to the public. Third, consumer compensation requires more than a company simply saying it considered the matter and decided what it thinks is appropriate. There should be regulations that establish clear parameters for compensation, including mandated payments for downtime that are automatically applied to customers' monthly bills. Fourth, the communication standards on outages should also not be left to the carriers alone. Outage maps, estimated times to address problems, and consistent, widely accessible communications have become standard for other utilities such as hydro. The same should be true for communication services, with penalties levied for failure to meet the requisite standard. Fifth, competition concerns with Canada's communication sector must be met with real policy reforms. While the Rogers CEO may try to claim otherwise with a straight face, few dispute the competition problems that leave Canada's broadband and wireless pricing as among the most expensive in the world. The carriers, as we just heard in one exchange, the carriers have often touted the link between high prices and network quality. But the latest outage confirms that the networks often fail to live up to the industry hype. Instead, high prices mean consumers gravitate to riskier bundled options in order to reduce monthly bills. Canada needs real competition that draws on both facilities-based and services-based competitors. Sixth, the Rogers-Shaw merger should be regarded as dead in the water, as the last things Canadians need is an even more concentrated market. This committee has already recommended that the merger not proceed, but left it out in the event that it does. It should adopt an even stronger position in opposing the merger now. Seventh, the next chair of the CRTC is scheduled to be appointed in the coming weeks. In the aftermath of the Rogers outage, a former CRTC posted about a commission investigation saying, and I quote, "I don't think the CRTC is the body to run such an inquiry. They've become captive to the big players, and the current membership are not trustworthy trust seekers. This cannot stand. It's essential that the chair prioritize Canada's communications infrastructure and its impact on consumers and business as the single most important policy issue faced by the CRTC. That person must be independent with knowledge of the sector. While there's been an emphasis on cultural policy in recent months, CanCon policies don't matter if Canadians can't access the content or the network. Since communications is job one, a truly independent, digital and network-focused chair of the CRTC is essential. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Geist. And next we have Mr. Klaas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Vice Chairs, and members. Thank you for inviting me to appear today. I'm joining you from Treaty 3 on the traditional land of the Anishinaabe Nation at the border of Manitoba and Ontario. I should note that I'm a director of the Internet Society Canada chapter, as well as the Public Interest Advocacy Centre. These views I express here today are mine alone and do not necessarily represent those of the organizations to which I belong. The outage that we collectively experienced several weeks ago was incredibly disruptive, and as a result, people across the country are justifiably upset. I think the best way to proceed from an event like this is to take it as a learning opportunity and to reflect upon how to improve our situation. Millions of people rely upon Rogers services for their communication needs, and most of us tend to take ubiquitous connectivity for granted when it's working as it should. The majority of the time, things do run smoothly, thanks to a lot of behind-the-scenes hard work and dedication from people who work at companies like Rogers. But when these systems do break down, which is inevitable from time to time, they suddenly become visible in ways that highlight how deeply embedded communications infrastructure is in our lives. For those of us who normally take access to telecommunications as a given, being unexpectedly disconnected provides a glimpse into what it's like for those who live with limited or otherwise inadequate access in the first place. This outage reminds us not only of the need to improve the reliability of our networks, but the urgent requirement to expand the benefits of communication systems to all. The challenges facing our communications environment are not new. Communication markets around the country are highly concentrated, and we're told that this has been permitted because large, powerful companies can deliver the goods in ways that smaller businesses cannot. This is a common refrain in discussions on communication policy in our country. Earlier this month, this story was given a reality check. The Rogers outage has revealed the significant shortcomings of a system that encourages too much control by corporate behemoths. The harms of this outage were magnified because of a system that prioritizes bigness. When we place all of our faith on a small number of corporate giants, we put too many eggs in one basket. And when one company's technical glitch can cause millions across the country to be knocked offline, we can see that bigger is not always better. When managing large technical systems, the question is not whether there will be a failure, but rather when one will occur. Efforts must be taken to prevent foreseeable errors, but we must also recognize that failures will inevitably take place, and we must be prepared to mitigate their impact. We can think about solutions both in terms of immediate measures that should be taken and broader environmental changes that shape the conditions in which we're operating as well. First, there needs to be a process in place to ensure that when people suddenly find themselves disconnected, they're informed of the situation in a timely manner and provided with the necessary information they need to arrange their affairs accordingly. When the hydro goes out, power companies provide outage maps and communicate regularly about estimated time of repair. In short, better communication during outages should be a no-brainer for a company like Rogers. Second, decentralization is a fundamental to ensuring communication networks will function in an emergency. This means that Rogers does not bear the sole responsibility for ensuring things like 911 will always be available. The CRTC already facilitates the technical implementation of its policy through collaborative industry working groups, as we've heard. But despite this, 911 was simply not available for people on July 8th. The regulator therefore bears some responsibility for this failure. Its processes must be improved, and perhaps it should be required to rethink its relatively permissive approach to regulating critical services. But we shouldn't just rely on these companies and the regulator to do better. At the root of the problem is that we're relying on a handful of companies that have become too big to fail. This is a systemic problem. We can, however, approach things differently. First, we should say no to the Rogers-Shaw merger. This committee, as well as the Heritage Committee, have already expressed grave reservations about this merger. Further expanding one company's control over the country's communication infrastructure would be a mistake. Second, resilience can be improved by bolstering the CRTC's existing framework for competition. There are ways that this regime for competitor access to incumbent networks can be configured that improves reliability. Maximizing the independence of the competitors who rely on access to incumbent facilities using technical means is one way to make our system more robust, and it's also something that the Competition Bureau has endorsed in the past. Finally, there are other ways to structure our communication markets than what we have today. Encouraging smaller and more community-oriented networks would contribute to a system that is more resilient and responsive to users. Public companies like SaskTel and TBayTel, and smaller outfits like the National Capital Freenet and First Nations-owned KNet in Northern Ontario are examples of companies that operate today, prioritizing delivering robust, accountable communications solutions to the communities they serve. Thinking about how to carve out a different structure for our communications market should form a part of our long-term plan for solving the problems that face us today. Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Klass. And next we have Mr. Winzik for 5 minutes. And Mr. Winzik, you're on mute.
And of course. Okay. Well, thank you very much to the committee chair, members of the committee, and fellow panelists for coming together on this very important meeting. So the Rogers Communication Service outage underscores the risk of so many essential public services relying on a tight oligopoly of players. Communication services underpin the economy, society, and people's daily lives. Typically, such things are taken for granted until they break down, as was illustrated so powerfully when the Rogers Communications outage on July 8th took place. With it, it disabled access to 911 services, financial services payment systems like Interact, and the ability of businesses, health, law enforcement, and citizens to go about their daily activities. Rogers Communications Services outage raises significant questions about how we approach communications and internet regulation. The idea that communication services are essential public services and that people must have access to universal, affordable, and secure communications is a bedrock principle of telecommunications policy in the Telecommunications Act and has been since communication regulation first emerged in this country in the early 1900s. Those principles must be updated and reinforced for the 21st century. The undue emphasis on market forces in the 2006 Telecommunications Policy Directive, alongside the company's rhetoric and regulatory hesitance within the CRTC, ISED, and the Competition Bureau since, must change. Excessive dependence on one or a small number of essential communication service providers is risky. As of 2021, the big five communications and internet conglomerates in Canada, Bell, Rogers, TELUS, Shaw, and Videotron, accounted for roughly 87% of the 71 million mobile wireless and wireline connections in Canada that support mobile phone, internet service, television distribution, and POTS, plain old telephone service. Rogers accounts for close to a quarter of all such connections, or 16.5 million connections on its own. It is already the second largest communications conglomerate in this country. If its proposed deal to acquire Shaw Communications, the fourth largest such company in this country, is approved, its share would grow to a third of the market, or 23.5 million connections in service. This is too much control over essential communication services to rest with one firm. It is risky. It is a bad idea, and I urge policymakers to block this deal or carefully consider alternative options that I will lay out below. The scale, scope, and significance of essential service providers means that they must have public obligations to match their importance as the gateways through which society's communications must pass. Some recent steps by the Competition Bureau, a few murmurs at ISED, have recognized this, although the role of CRTC under its current chair has been entirely inadequate. The appointment of a new chair must reflect such realities rather than give in to those who want to put someone in charge from the broadcast industries. I think it's also important to move away from what we heard far too much of this morning, this mother may I approach, where the minister speaks toughly ISED and regulators treat the tight oligopoly of players who control Canada's communication infrastructure with kids' gloves and undue deference. It is time to use the legislative measures at the minister's disposal and to impose more stringent regulatory mandates on the carriers with respect to network quality, information disclosure requirements, and measures to be adopted when network outages or disruptions occur. This means, for example, that instead of the minister and the CRTC jawboning and requesting that the major communication providers come up with a plan within 60 days to mitigate the impacts of future outages, that they need to take a number of steps. Here's 5 quick ones. 1, use order and council powers under Section 8 of the Telecommunications Act to order the companies to devise a plan that meets policymakers and the public's expectations. 2nd, impose tougher conditions of licenses during spectrum auctions or transfers with respect to network quality standards, information disclosure, and disruption reporting. 3, require temporary network switching in the case of network outages governed by mandatory rules that allow institutional users to fall back on secondary contracts for services or allow everyday users to temporarily switch service providers using a web-based application with a daily cap on fees for the duration of the problem. 4th, the proposed Rogers-Shaw deal should be a dead letter, with the risks and vulnerabilities of the recent outage adding to the already long list of why this deal is bad for Canadians. 5th, if we need to think of a quite imaginative alternative, if this deal should be approved, require that Shaw's wireless assets be spun off into a confederation of publicly, community, and independently owned communication enterprises that offer mobile wireless and internet access to underserved and unserved Canadians from coast to coast to coast. Elsewhere, I've dubbed this the Great Canadian Communications Corporation, and we may need to think about something like that for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Winzik. And finally, we have Mr. Lawford for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is John Lawford, Executive Director, General Counsel at the Public Interest Advocacy Center. PIAC is a national nonprofit organization and registered charity that provides legal and research services on behalf of consumers and in particular vulnerable consumers. PIAC has been active in the field of communications law and policy for over 40 years. Unlike previous quality of service regimes for wireline telephone, now all but abandoned by the CRTC, there have never been quality of service requirements imposed on companies for wireless or internet retail service. This is why the Commission, who you have just heard, has a hard time describing just what it is doing to both inquire into Rogers' outage and to ensure that it will not happen again, not only to Rogers, but to any other telecommunications service provider. I could bore you with details about regulation by competition under changes from the 1993 Telecommunications Act and talk of forbearance from regulation, but the result is the same. Canadians are at risk of going digitally dark at any time, and frankly, there are no rules for how the telco involved must communicate the outage, to whom, nor what services are impacted, nor when service will be restored, nor whether customers will get a rebate, nor whether emergency connectivity can or will be restored. In short, there is nothing. Rogers says, trust us, and sorry, and we will fix it after it has happened at least twice. We say, we don't trust you. The regulator should say, trust but verify, inform, compensate, and become resilient. But we have no faith the CRTC has said that or will ensure that. PIAC filed a letter on the day of the Rogers outage requesting that the CRTC firstly conduct a CRTC-led inquiry under Section 48 of the Telecommunications Act to inquire into the Rogers outage, and secondly, to initiate a notice of consultation involving all internet and wireless providers to set a baseline of service resumption, notification, compensation, interconnection, and emergency response. These two formal processes would ensure that the CRTC could ensure that Rogers made necessary corrections and, more importantly, that all consumers taking service from all telecommunications service providers would be protected going forward in a similar manner. The CRTC then announced it would ask Rogers questions and, by implication, I believe, not undertake the two more thorough public and open complete investigations. This means, we think, the CRTC will do nothing more. They are sweeping this under the rug, and yet they have lots of power and tons of jurisdiction to do it. We have reviewed Rogers' responses filed Friday. They are predictably redacted and effectively useless and opaque. The Minister's request for a mutual assistance agreement between major telcos for emergency coverage and a limited roaming is only a tiny portion of the answer. Parliament can act when the CRTC refuses to do so. It can make changes to the Telecommunications Act. In 2014, Parliament, tired of waiting for the CRTC to issue a wireless roaming tariff to make roaming more affordable and available, amended the Telecommunications Act to add Section 27.1, temporarily setting a rate until the CRTC moved itself to replace the legislated rate with a regulated one. It did so relatively quickly. Similarly, here Parliament can legislate. They can legislate the baseline protections that PIAC and retail customers are demanding, and dare the CRTC to actually replace those requirements with a holistic regulatory regime for outages. We ask you to do it. Those are our comments, and we welcome your questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lawford, and to all of our witnesses. Moving on to questions. First, we have Ms. Gray from the Conservatives for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses for being here today. My first few questions are for Dr. Geist. We heard today how the CRTC, as the regulator of telecommunications, has not taken risk assessment or oversight seriously, unlike other regulators who do. And so would you agree with this, and do you think that they should be?
Oh, absolutely. And Mr. Lawford, I think, just pointed to this as well. And, you know, it was, I thought, remarkable and exceptionally discouraging to watch the chair of the CRTC kind of give a virtual shrug when posed with questions about the role that new regulations could play, about the role that penalties could play, about the role that competition could play, as if all of this is just inevitable and it's just there for the CRTC after the fact to engage in a bit of fact finding. If the regulator is to mean anything, surely it's got to do more than just that.
Well, for myself, listening to the answers from the executives at the CRTC, I felt like I was actually questioning senior telecom executives, not the regulator. And so on that note, would you agree that the CRTC is not fulfilling their mandate as regulator and the minister is not holding the CRTC accountable?
I think you can make a compelling case on both of those fronts. You know, there has been an enormous amount of concern and frustration about the way the CRTC has conducted itself. There have been allegations of bias with the current CRTC chair and the industry itself. So your observation about thinking that you're listening to a telecom executive can be forgiven given the way some people have perceived the way the CRTC has conducted itself. It shifted from an approach that tried to put consumers and the public interest at the center to one in which they seem to be missing altogether. And so we've got a real problem. And the role that the government has been willing to do so little in terms of becoming more aggressive, even the most recent policy direction from the minister felt like a bit more like more of the same. And it's one of the reasons why I've really emphasized the identity of the next CRTC chair is really mission critical to the future of Canada's communications infrastructure.
Well, we heard today from Rogers, and part of the testimony that became clear was that Rogers does not have a chief risk officer or someone within that type of a role in a senior executive position overseeing risk of the company, which was quite surprising considering the complexity and how large the organization is. Do you have any thoughts on that, or how they might view risk assessment within their own organization based on the results that you've seen?
You know, based on the hearing, I think their primary view is that the biggest risk they face is a regulatory risk. When they were asked repeated questions about essential services, they punted on the question and refused to answer it. When asked questions about the merger, they tried to avoid that question, and ultimately even just talked about how 25,000 employees go to work hard every day as opposed to addressing some of the core concerns that people have. I'm sure people do work hard, but it can't be that your primary focus, it would seem at times, is whether or not legislators and the regulator are going to do their job on these issues. And that was, to me, the primary takeaway I took away from many of the comments that came from the CEO today.
Mm-hmm. Going back to the CRTC, I mean, it's clear that they're already having trouble meeting their current mandate. And as such, this, of course, has to do with the 911 services that went down and also the alerting system services that went down. So with that, do you feel that adding further responsibilities will further dilute their ability to do their work? And one good example might be C11.
Yeah, I think it would be. I think the CRTC has really struggled to meet its mandate and do what I think Canadians would expect. I mean, frankly, the way in which it de-emphasizes competition as just something, well, it might happen, and it would be nice if it did, as opposed to one of its top priorities leading to the kind of affordability and resiliency that we've heard talked about over the course of the day, really ought to be job one. It's an organization that's got little experience dealing with some of these internet-related issues, and the notion of taking C11, C18, potentially some of the online harms issues, investing in the commission all of those additional responsibilities, I think ought to leave us pretty concerned.
My next couple of questions will be for Mr. Klaas. One of the statements that you had made previously was that the fact that the outage occurred on such a wide scale, and it would have been worse had Rogers already taken Shaw over. Can you explain that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. And so in dismissing competition as something that's implicated in this issue, I've heard many people say, well, if you have more competitors in the market, some of them are going to be relying on the big telecoms. They would have gone down as well. We heard that some of the resellers or wholesale-based providers who were on Rogers, their customers were also out. And maybe people who live in rural areas, I'm one of them right now, wouldn't have a choice anyway. But I think that misses the issue that we've put a lot of eggs in one basket. As I said, Rogers has over 10 million mobile customers. They've got 2.5 million people on their home internet service. I don't know how many commercial customers they have, but obviously some important ones, most notably Interac. And so I think the core concern there is that if we had more competition here, if we had a more decentralized environment, the impacts of these types of things would be contained. Okay. You wouldn't be seeing 10 million people all of a sudden dropping off the network across the country.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One more quick question here. You had mentioned in your testimony that the regulator bears some responsibility, and you also used the word permissive. Can you just quickly explain a little bit what you meant by that?
Yeah, so the CRTC has forborne from lots of its responsibilities on they have a legislative power to forbear from regulation when they find that markets are sufficiently competitive to protect the interests of users. And what this has looked like in practice is that the CRTC refrains from regulating on the assumption that things are going to work just fine based on the behavior of market players. This has been the overarching trend that the regulator has pursued for the last 30 years. And we see examples, numerous ones having been listed today, where it's on its face clearly not the case that users' interests are being protected. The high prices is one of the main ones that we're used to hearing about. But this network outage is another one. And so we heard Commissioner Chairperson Scott telling us about the ESWIG working group. The CRTC sets policies and then it hands off the implementation of those policies to these working groups that are made up of CRTC representatives and people from industry who then periodically report back. And I don't mean to downplay the hard work that the people in those groups do, but if the CRTC is sort of just putting it on autopilot and letting the industry sort things out and assuming it's going to work, we have a pretty good example here in front of us where we might need them to start sort of looking behind the curtain and making sure that these types of groups are actually doing their job.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Klaas and Ms. Gray. And next we have Ms. Lapointe for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and I will be sharing my time with MP Erskine Smith today. My first question is for Mr. Winsick. We've heard a lot of people today tell us that this outage was unprecedented. In your opinion, could this system failure have been anticipated by Rogers, especially given that they have experienced widespread network issues in the past?
And you're on mute.
My apologies for that, folks. We're on summer holidays here, and anyway, I think MP Gray has stressed the importance of a risk assessment officer with senior responsibilities. That's somebody to, keep their eyes open for these kinds of things and to have a proper contingency plan in place so that we don't see the kind of response that was put into motion by Rogers when this problem started to erupt. These problems, they are in a very complicated system like the telecommunications system that exists across this country. They are going to emerge from time to time. Here, the idea that they are inevitable, I think, is true. The question, though, is how to minimize that risk, to quarantine that risk when it does occur, and to properly put in measures that are going to prevent them from happening in the beginning.
Mr. Geist. Earlier, Mr. Scott from the CRTC indicated that one cannot guarantee a system failure will never happen again. And he said that the CRTC is focused more on contingency planning, what must be in place should an outage occur again. Do you agree with this position?
No, I don't. I think what we've got here is, we have this set up in this country where the premise is, and it's a faulty premise, that we have sufficient competition and that the marketplace will deliver the goods. In the past, where we had even less competition before the transition to competition, there was a greater premium put on network reliability. Okay, but now we have this illusion that we have enough competition in place that the regulator and policymakers can basically take their hands off the wheel and leave industry alone. I think what we've done is we've fallen between the legs of the stool, and we have neither a monopoly as we had in the past nor competition today, and that's why I refer to a tight oligopoly. And the problem, however, is that we don't have a policy and regulatory framework set up in place in which regulators are going to deal honestly and candidly with the reality that this market will never be fully competitive, and the company's feet need to be held to the fire to ensure that essential public services are reliable, affordable, universally accessible, and that we can try to push competition as far as it's possible. But right now we kind of have this regulators expressing undue deference to the industry, extraordinary reluctance to actually regulate an industry that has the kind of gatekeeper and market power that these companies have in this country, and a minister that is leaning on this mother may I approach versus reaching into the legislative toolkit that he has and applying it and asking sharp questions about what is needed more.
Smith, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Vivian. Mr. Geist, I want to pick up where you comment around the CRTC chair being mission critical appointment. And in your view, do you share the view that the overriding consideration for that appointment has to be the best interests of consumers with some knowledge of the communications marketplace?
Well, I would say that the number one priority needs to be a regulator that acts in the public interest. And I don't think that's something that we've seen out of the Commission. Now, I think the way that you achieve that policy objective of acting in the best interest of the public interest is someone that puts consumers and competition at the very center of its regulatory process, not one that comes across as apologizing for the inadequacies that might exist amongst the dominant players and simply suggest that, well, that's just the way it is.
Yeah, just the way it is. And oh, by the way, I just happen to be the CRTC chair. You list off 7 points, and some seem straightforward and obvious to me. That you'd have consumer compensation, the way we do with airlines, for example. I'd indicated earlier. You have communication standards with respect to outages. That undoubtedly some lessons to be learned in collaboration with the FCC around resiliency. When you speak to, though, competition concerns and the need for real policy reforms, it has felt like CRTC has played around the edges. I mean, they've got major powers here. They can order companies to provide services. They can order connections be made. They can set rates charged and impose just and reasonable rates. They tend to do none of these things from what I've seen. But when you look at additional substantive reform, we've looked at structural separation at this committee. There's any number of commentators who would call for opening up the sector to trusted but foreign competition. Should we be embracing these ideas, and what else should we be embracing?
I think this committee in particular has a pretty good track record, I think, when it comes to conducting hearings in this sector and coming forward with recommendations. The frustration has been that they haven't always been adopted by the government of the day or the CRTC. I think the MVNO issue on the wireless side is a classic example where there is an opportunity still is an opportunity to try to ensure that we get more service-based competition into the wireless sector. And we saw both the CRTC and the government deeply reluctant, I think, to move in that direction. And, the minister came out with what he thought was what he has promoted as a new policy direction. And while it was a good thing, I think, to sort of wipe the slate clean and come up with something new, I think many took a look at some of those recommendations and felt it was by and large business as usual. And so there's been, I think, a real reluctance to shake things up in the way that's needed.
Thanks very much. That's my time. We tend to forget that countries like Australia exist when I take a look at it. Anyway, thanks very much.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Erskine-Smith and Ms. Lapointe. Next, we have Monsieur Lemire for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd be curious to hear what our witnesses think of Quebecor buying part of Rogers. Do you think that they can act as a fourth player on the telecommunications scene? Sir, I'll give you the floor. I don't really have any comments on the competition aspect. So I'd leave that to others.
Monsieur Winsack, est-ce que vous seriez...
Mr. Winsack, could you comment on Freedom Mobile being bought by Quebecor?
Sorry, I didn't have the translation on, so I didn't hear the question. The quick question is, Freedom Mobile being acquired by Quebecor, is that an adequate solution? Is that helpful in this situation? I think the answer is no. I don't believe that Freedom Mobile is the linchpin in this deal. I believe that this is a lowball kind of offer. We see that, not only, or basically, Rogers and Shaw are not even agreeing to divest all of the wireless assets here. They're just trying to take 3/4 of a loaf and spin that off, Freedom Mobile to Quebecor, as if that's good enough. And I think that is of a piece with the way in which the companies have hubristically approached this transaction from day one, as if it was a slam dunk and that they could lowball their offers to appease regulators. And that, I think, speaks to some of the things that Ben, John, and Michael have also pointed to here all along, this idea that the regulators have struck a very weak stance in the face of intransigent market power, concentrated markets, and they're used to getting what they want. And so the divestiture of Freedom to Quebecor, I think, it should be, not given serious consideration.
Mr. Klaas?
Mr. Klaas?
I largely share Dr. Winsack's views. My take on the situation really is that on the basis of the arguments the Competition Bureau has made, to allow Quebecor to take over Freedom Mobile would be very risky. I think that we need to be valuing the bird in the hand over the one that might appear in the bush in this particular case. We've seen Explore Mobile offered as a remedy in the past. This is a company that was supposed to make up for the loss of competition in Manitoba, having failed despite the fact that it has the potential to access the tremendous capitalization through the American hedge fund that owns its parent company. And now Manitoba is left with less competition than anywhere else. In Ottawa, in fact, has the most competitive wireless market, I believe, in the country with 5 carriers. You can choose between Videotron, Shaw, Bell, TELUS, or Rogers. You'd be seeing a decrease in competition in the national capital region that wouldn't be addressed by this merger. So I think, by and large, the history of these types of mergers in Canada has not worked out in the favor of competition, despite the promises that have been made and the assurances that have been given. And I see very little in this present arrangement to change my mind on that.
Monsieur Jess? Yes?
Nice, Jess. I think we've heard from Ben and Dwayne and John already on this. I would say that, if we're serious about competition in this country, and I think that this has been an ongoing concern, the idea of this merger, frankly, wouldn't even gotten out of the gate at all. I think it was only because of the success of getting a merger through in Manitoba, despite what we now know to be significant implications for competition in that province, that we were even seeing it at all. The Bureau says they need more time to assess the implications of those merger. Roger, as I understand it, is trying to oppose some of those efforts. And so surely at a minimum, we need the Bureau that's already expressed concerns about this to be able to study this effectively. And we're seeing Roger saying, no, we want to rush ahead with this. And that's, to me, sends a bit of an alert signal that there may be real issues here.
Merci. Et en complément, est-ce que vous...
Thank you. And do you have any examples of what happens in other countries that might provide inspiration for what the government's response should be? Do they have things put in place to prevent these outages?
Sugis?
Mr. Geist?
I'm in agreement with the notion that there is some inevitability to seeing some of these occur. What's not, and in fact, we've seen it in Japan, we've seen the United States recently, you do see it in a lot of jurisdictions. Obviously, some of the other jurisdictions have started to move towards things like emergency arrangements and roaming and those sorts of things. But what you don't find necessarily in many of those jurisdictions is the reliance on such a small number of competitors in the way that we see here, nor the degree of bundling that we see here, so that the impact that was felt in this kind of outage is something that you wouldn't typically see in many other jurisdictions. You simply don't have consumers who are that large percentage of the population invested in a single player in terms of their services and having so many of those services wrapped up in it. And what I also think that you find in other places is both a government and a regulator where there's a greater willingness to become more actively engaged on some of these issues. I think the takeaway from today is that it's only been a couple of weeks, and there's this distinct sense of, well, we can move on as long as we throw Rogers under the bus and they say that they're willing to spend enough money to fix this narrow problem. It's not about just this narrow problem. There are bigger issues, and this really needs to be the wake-up call to begin to address some of those.
Merci.
All right, thank you, Monsieur Lemire. And finally, we have Mr. Massey for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. I think I've been on this committee for 17 of my 20 years on Parliament. There's almost 2 inevitabilities. First of all, we have summer meetings, and the second one is when the CRTC commissioner comes to committee, I lose my stuff. And the reason for that is it seems so frustrating, and I'm in terms of we have potential action that can take place, but never seems to happen. So I'll start with Mr. Lawford. Though, is there something else that we can force Cabinet to do, or Cabinet maybe be interested in doing to review this type of a situation? Is there, and then I'll get to Mr. Geist later and the other witnesses virtually about the CRTC, but is there any other paths forward for us to get a more robust examination of the failings here? Because at the end of the day, this is a controllable thing, in my opinion.
Thank you for the question. Sure. Apart from a proper CRTC deep dive and a reconsideration of whether to impose quality of service requirements on the companies, which is our preferred way to go. Cabinet can also go under Section 14 of the Telecommunications Act and ask for a report. So if the CRTC is not doing a report, because there's no guarantee they will, then Cabinet can ask for a complete report and make the CRTC do it. At the moment, we're not quite clear on what's going on at the CRTC, and we wrote procedurally today to say, why are you asking these questions? Are you going to do a proper hearing? And we haven't heard back yet.
And so this is important. We heard from the chair saying that basically he thinks the industry can fix this, and it's in their best interests. And so that still is, well, in my opinion, kind of shrugging it off. But we can still then ask for this Section 14 report to Cabinet. Now, that won't be made public unless Cabinet makes it public, one of my other criticisms, but at least it triggers a different process. So do I have it all correct with this?
The idea is to have the CRTC get some idea of the seriousness. Now, they're saying they're serious about it, but if the chair of the CRTC is also saying industry has an incentive to fix this, maybe they do now that there's a public issue and you're having hearings, but public attention wanes. Really, they have an incentive to not look into it, because Rogers announced over the weekend they would be having to spend an extra $10 billion over the next few years to fix this. They already have to pay $28 billion to the Shaw family. Now they've got to find $10 more billion. Where are they going to get that money? They're going to raise prices.
That's an interesting point, and I might come back to that later. I'm going to go to our virtual witnesses now, to Mr. Geist and our other witnesses. I'll get there. The CRTC, how, and I'm like Mr. Geist, you've got some good recommendations, and you're pointing out some policy there. Is it fixable? I guess in terms of if we point the right chair, or if Parliament actually forces its way into the discussion matter and we get the right person, or do we need even more robust changes later on? But if is it solid enough? Is that a start just by having the personality type difference? I mean, we have a former CEO from one of the majors as part of our oversight right now, and that doesn't cut it for me, especially with all these non-public meetings.
Yeah, I would say that certainly the link between industry and the chairs, has certainly raised eyebrows really from the beginning of the appointment, and it has continued to do so. Listen, I don't know that there's ever going to be perfection, and nobody's perfect, of course, but a starting point of both a clear mandate. The chair seemed to recoil at the notion that there was a mandate as an independent regulator, but it does seem to me fairly clear that you can establish a chair, and that it is the government in its role as providing the oversight that the chair acknowledged exists, that can both set a clear mandate and where some of those priorities lie, and can certainly do so in terms of ensuring that the CRTC, or mandating that it act first and foremost in the public interest by prioritizing some of the consumer and competition-related concerns. So part of it is who you appoint. I think it matters. There's very strong staff at the CRTC without doubt, but there's a need. At the end of the day, there is leadership at the top, and that makes a difference. And then I also think that there is the role that the government and cabinet plays in all of this. So if the CRTC kicks this a little bit back to the government to say, well, listen, they're the ones providing oversight. And I thought I heard Scott sort of say that that's real oversight. You shouldn't be dismissive of that. Well, we need the government to engage in that, and we need far more aggressive, I think, at least particularly at this moment, hands-on approach from the government. I mean, we've had the minister while in Japan say, this is a problem, I'm going to get involved, but you can't sort of just wash your hands of it and say, here's the three things, and I'll see you in a couple of months and we can figure out if there's anything more to do. There are systemic issues that exist here, and if the CRTC isn't going to fix it, it's up to the government to ensure that it does.
Yeah, and I think it's fair. I want to be fair here to the minister. He's been active on a bunch of files, but I was a little bit distraught when he said that the CRTC is an independent position, almost like it's appointed by somebody else or some other, I guess, independent body. I mean, at the end of the day, we set the terms and conditions, even how the CRTC operates, and appointing the person and has to respond back to Parliament. I'm just not buying that it's completely independent. Once you appoint the person, there is influence.
Well, in fact, the government is giving itself even more power as part of C11 to overrule the CRTC. I think there needs to be a difference between, obviously, once you start getting into the evidence and decision making, you want that independence. But in terms of trying to ensure that you've got both the right kinds of people that inspire public confidence in the commission, in ensuring that there's a clear delineation of what the policy priorities are, and an expressed willingness to exercise powers, both the powers that the government has as well as the powers that the CRTC has. So much of that has gone missing, I think, in recent years. And there's a desperate need, I think, to hit the reset button, in a sense, on many of those issues now as we come closer to a change in leadership.
Mr. Chair, do I have any more time to allow Mr. Winsek and Close just to add a couple comments?
A couple of comments, and then we're done.
Okay, yeah, just gentlemen, if you have any quick thoughts, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps this might be among the stranger things you heard today, but I'm a huge fan of the CRTC, actually, because I think it provides a venue for democratic participation in something we all think is important. There have been improvements in the way it's been managed in recent years. You see a lot of women on the management team there, and I think that that's a proven technique to getting to better decision making. So I think looking at ensuring management, as Dr. Geist has pointed out, and putting the right people in place is important. And I'll just also point you quickly to something that's sort of gotten lost in the discussion of the cultural aspects of the Broadcasting and Telecommunications Legislative Review Panel's recommendations. It's within the powers of Parliament to actually modernize the CRTC itself. And there are some recommendations in that report that I think it would be worth picking up on, and that I hope don't get consigned to the dustbin of history amongst the hustle-bustle discussion of online streaming.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm sorry. All right, I did say Mr. Winsek would get a minute, so very, very quick, please.
All right. So over a decade ago, a Harvard study pointed to regulatory hesitance at the CRTC for source of our woes then. I think that problem has been really compounded under the current leadership. So that's one major job, getting that right. Second thing, the BTLR report is chock-a-block full of good ideas in some of in the second chapter and the last chapter, but all attention has been on the cultural policy and broadcasting policy reforms in chapter 3. And to my view, that is the weakest read in that whole report and that committee's work, but it's sucking up all the oxygen at the expense of the kinds of issues that we're talking about here. So I think we need to really address that. And third, I think, and this will be my final point, we really must insist on recognizing reality, which is these markets will always be highly concentrated, and it is dependent upon regulators and policymakers to recognize that reality and to do what they can to erect curbs on that market power and to impose mandatory public interest obligations and steps to ensure that these kinds of risks with network outages are minimized.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Mr. Massé, and to our witnesses and to all of our MPs for joining us today. The meeting is adjourned.
Merci à l'équipe.